In the small, sleepy town of Alderton, nestled at the edge of an ancient forest, nothing much ever happened. The residents lived their lives in quiet contentment, rarely disturbed by the outside world. But everything changed when a peculiar object appeared at the town's modest library. It was an old, leather-bound diary with brittle pages, its cover marked with cryptic symbols. No one knew how the diary had arrived there. There was no record of it being donated, and the librarian, Mrs. Thompson, swore she had never seen it before. The words on the front were in a language she didn't recognize, but inside, the pages were strangely blank. One gloomy autumn evening, the town's only high school teacher, Mr. Jonas Miller, stumbled upon the diary while searching for books for his history class. Always curious about ancient artifacts, he picked it up. The leather felt unnaturally warm under his fingertips, almost as if it were alive. Without much thought, he tucked it into his bag, intending to examine it later. That night, as the wind howled outside his window, Jonas sat by the fireplace, the flames casting long, eerie shadows around his modest living room. He opened the diary again, and to his astonishment, the pages that had been blank in the library now had writing. It wasn't in English but in some archaic script. The more he stared, the more the letters seemed to shift, rearranging themselves into words he could understand. The diary whispered to him, softly at first, but as the night wore on, the voice grew louder in his mind. It spoke of forbidden knowledge, dark secrets, and, most troubling of all, the power it could grant. The words on the page seemed to be speaking directly to him, promising unimaginable rewards if he just followed its guidance. Jonas, rational and grounded, laughed it off at first. "This is just a book," he muttered to himself. But a seed of doubt had been planted, and despite his attempts to shrug it off, the diary's presence lingered in his thoughts like a shadow. The next day, strange things began happening. Jonas woke up feeling an uncontrollable urge to bring the diary to school, to share its contents with someone. He found himself drawn to one student in particular, a quiet, intelligent boy named Peter, who was always engrossed in books. During his lunch break, Jonas handed the diary to Peter without much explanation. "Take a look at this. I found it last night. It's unusual." Peter hesitated, but curiosity got the better of him. As he opened the diary, his eyes widened in shock. The blank pages began to fill with words, just as they had for Jonas. Peter read the strange text, his face growing pale. "What does it say?" Jonas asked, noticing the boy's sudden discomfort. Peter closed the book abruptly, his hands shaking. I don't know. It's just strange." Jonas didn't push further, though he could see fear in the boy's eyes. Peter returned the diary without another word and left the classroom quickly, leaving Jonas alone with a sinking feeling in his stomach. That night, Peter didn't come home. His parents, frantic, contacted the police, but no one had seen or heard from him. As the days passed with no word, rumors began to spread through the town. Some whispered that Peter had run away. Others believed something more sinister had happened. Only Jonas knew the truth, or at least part of it. 2 days after Peter's disappearance, a woman was found dead in her home, her throat slit, and her house in disarray. It was Peter's mother. The police had no leads, but Jonas felt a deep, gnawing suspicion. He couldn't shake the connection between Peter, the diary, and the escalating violence. Jonas found himself drawn back to the diary that night. As he opened it, the pages began to write themselves again. This time, the diary spoke more clearly, its words sharp and sinister. "You've tasted the darkness now, Jonas. There is no turning back." Jonas recoiled, slamming the book shut, but it was too late. He could feel it, something had changed in him. The diary was no ordinary book. It had a will of its own, and worse, it was controlling the actions of those who read it. But why? What did it want? The answer came in a dream that night. Jonas found himself standing in a desolate, barren landscape. The sky was a deep, blood red, and the ground beneath him was cracked and scorched. Before him stood a figure, a tall, shadowy being, its eyes glowing like embers. The figure held the diary in its hand, its voice like the rumble of distant thunder. "The diary is my tool, my instrument. Through it, I command. Through it, I feed." Jonas tried to speak, but no words came out. The figure stepped closer, towering over him. "Each crime committed brings me closer to the world of the living. Each drop of blood spilled grants me power." Jonas woke in a cold sweat, the figure's words echoing in his mind. The diary wasn't just influencing people, it was compelling them to commit acts of violence, all to serve the dark entity that resided within it. The more crimes that were committed, the stronger this entity became. The next morning, Jonas knew what he had to do. He had to destroy the diary before it consumed the entire town. But as he reached for the book, his hands trembled. The moment he touched the leather cover, he felt an overwhelming urge to open it, to read its words once more. The diary's influence was too strong. Desperation setting in, Jonas decided to confide in someone. He called his old friend, Mark, a professor of folklore and mythology at a nearby university. Mark was skeptical at first, but Jonas's urgency convinced him to visit Alderton that evening. When Mark arrived, Jonas showed him the diary. Mark examined it carefully, noting the strange symbols and the ancient script. "This isn't just any book," Mark said, his voice low. "It's a relic, likely tied to an ancient demon or spirit. These symbols are protective, but they've been corrupted. Whatever is inside this diary is dangerous." Jonas nodded, feeling a flicker of hope. "Can we destroy it?" Mark shook his head. "It's not that simple. Destroying it could release whatever is inside. We need to contain it, bind it again, and keep it from spreading its influence." Together, they devised a plan to perform a binding ritual, one that could trap the diary's power indefinitely. They gathered the necessary materials and prepared to perform the ritual in the woods outside of town, where the diary's power seemed weakest. But as they began the ritual, the wind picked up, howling through the trees. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and Jonas felt a cold, malevolent presence watching them. The diary, which had been lying on the ground, began to glow with an eerie red light. "You cannot stop me," a voice whispered in Jonas's mind. "The crimes will continue. My influence is too strong." Jonas's hands shook as he held the ritual items, but he pushed forward. Together, he and Mark chanted the ancient words, their voices rising above the wind. The diary pulsed with energy, its pages flipping wildly on their own. Suddenly, a shadowy figure emerged from the trees, the same figure from Jonas's dream. It was the demon that had been manipulating the town through the diary. Its eyes burned with rage as it advanced toward them. Mark shouted the final words of the ritual, and a bright light erupted from the ground, surrounding the diary. The demon let out a deafening roar as the light enveloped it, trapping it within the confines of the book once more. For a moment, everything was still. The wind died down, and the forest was silent. The diary lay motionless on the ground,